Welcome to Projects in Focus. I'm the host, Reece Dempster, and if you like how we've been bringing the lessons and projects across our industry here in Perth, please like, share, and tell a friend, as that will allow us to bring better guests and better projects to share and help you through your career pathway. Today, we are looking and turning back to what we covered in the first episode, Fiona Stanley. However, we're going to be focusing through monitoring controlling and how post its criticisms and Auditor General reports, the monitoring controlling played a critical element in bringing about change as well as allowing it to get across the finishing line. Today, we are joined by Associate Professor Laurie Hughes. He's a professor teaching at this ECU campus in the city, and he's helping us dive into this case study and providing his insights on how he uses this case study, not just in his teaching place, but also bringing some of the things and highlighting elements that we should be taking into our careers as we go through. He has a significant experience in not only the academic space, but also bringing students through on their career pathways. I first ran into Laurie last year in helping interact students with the career pathway. And ever since then, we've had some good conversations, including Laurie joining a debate that happened on International Project Managers Day last year. Laurie, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you.
Laurie, that was a really exciting thing that we did back on International Project Managers Day, wasn't it? You got up there and had a bit of a conversation about project management on that debate.
It was great fun. Really enjoyed it, and great to meet lots of people and have the debate on people versus processes. I'm glad we won. I understand it was close, but great fun nonetheless.
It was. So today we're here to talk about two things, Fiona Stanley and monitoring and controlling. I'd love to start with, what does monitoring and controlling mean to you?
Well, for big projects like Fiona Stanley, monitoring and controlling is a complex endeavour. Requirements change. You've got long lead time projects where you're trying to freeze requirements in early stage and then delivering that particular project, managing against your baseline plan. Things change, and managing that change is quite critical, especially with political interference, and that can be problems for the project management team.
Mm. It's almost like a hard thing to balance. You need to give them, the politicians, the information through monitoring and controlling that they're going to then use to say, oh, let's change this project sometimes, isn't it? It's a bit of a
It is,
balance.
But our methodologies, our processes give us the tools to manage that. Risk management. So, Mr. Politician, if you want that change, this is the impact on your project. What would you like to happen? I think that's the important thing, really, getting decision makers to fully understand the impact of the change they want to make. That is quite key. And it is all about trade-offs. We know that from the projects we manage. So it's important to make sure the people that will want to change the scope of our project understand what that really means for the delivery dates, the benefits they want to realize down the road.
What do you think is an element in the monitoring and controlling that is hard to communicate to students that they should really focus on?
The key thing is perhaps thinking about project complexity with these big capital type projects. That monitoring and controlling something as complex as this isn't easy. There's so many variables that are flying around. And yes, the tools and processes help us with that. But it's really trying to get students to fully understand that our methods, our approaches, our guidance can help us with all this. But really, what you're trying to do in the monitoring and controlling phase is working across a sound foundation from initiation. If that's done reasonably well, then hopefully this particular phase should be managed quite well. When it's not been done well, when it's rushed, when there are still outstanding issues with that first phase, where perhaps requirements haven't been bedded down, when perhaps the business case hasn't really been signed off or formalized, then you're carrying that risk throughout the project. That is the key problem, really. So the first phase is done pretty much well, when we should be relying upon our method and our approach and our skills as project managers to deliver what the plan says.
Oh, fantastic. Have you had any experience in that yourself from monitoring and controlling as a professional?
Yes, I used to work for Atkins many years ago in the UK. It used to be called WS Atkins in my day. And we were prime contractors delivering a lot of infrastructure and technology to large government departments, the defense space, the nuclear space, things like that. And also the fit out, the infrastructure, the technical side of things that goes with that as well. So some quite large, complex projects, different shapes and sizes. The key things, I think, when I think back to the projects I've been involved with, is the people, the culture in the organization, having an awareness or good insight into how that business, that organization works. And in terms of the project management, interaction, stakeholder management, we've got to flex what we do to work with that organization. I learned an awful lot about working within different organizations, different cultures, and that would affect the way that I would manage projects and manage people.
How did you interact with the need to have the most accurate data right now and the resources? Did you ever have a situation where you were balancing a bit of that situation?
Yes, there's always a trade-off. We want accurate information to make decisions when we're reporting on progress of projects, whether it's a monthly-based traffic light report that we're trying to deliver. We've got to make sure that we agree what that information looks like. Too much information is a bad thing, but also we have to be able to escalate some of the key risks, which I, as a project manager, perhaps could not manage, and those had to be escalated and owned by the steering committee or by the governance structure itself. So I can never think of a circumstance where I said I've had too much resource in this area, but it's having the right people, the right skills that will perhaps look beyond the data. Yes, okay, the data's saying something, but I have a knowledge of the organization and this can be translated to something else. It's important we understand this about the organization, the way people work, the culture, and that can make me have a more informed decision-making process for the projects I manage.
Wonderful. What about if you were to pick one of the projects that you worked on, what would be one of the best that you said that had a really good monitoring controlling element to it?
I think when I worked on a secure site project in the nuclear space, it was quite a complex project in that it involved a lot of scientists as well as engineers. And the key complexities of project managers is managing the stakeholders within that particular space. And being able to manage and control the deliverables when you have a lot of different people who've got a lot of control themselves in the outcomes of that particular project. So in this particular example, there were a lot of people who felt they owned certain aspects of the project itself. Of course, I'm responsible for delivery, but I felt it was being pushed and pulled in different areas because of perhaps politics in the organization, different self-interests. And for me, it was always quite clear the plan will inform myself and the people I report to what is delivered. The quality, that seemed to be problematic in that particular organization, in that people had different views of what that quality should have been. So in terms of the monitoring controlling space, that's where the argument took place, really. There wasn't the sort of concept of minimal viable product back then. It had to work in the way specified. And that was very hard to fully articulate at day one on a long lead time project. So that took a lot of my time and effort to try and get some kind of shared vision of the quality of the deliverables the project was intending to deliver.
Awesome. How did you, it sounds like you had a really good experience in that space. I know you can't probably talk too much about the elements of the project, but what were some of the key elements that were successful in the monitoring controlling? Was it the technology, the people, or a bit of both?
I think that when it comes down to how we manage our projects, we all expect a certain level of tool availability, otherwise we can't do it. And of course, with modern technology, we can expand the use of AI and things like that. But back then, we had Primavera planning tool. We had a great risk management function within the organization. And that was done really, really well using, I can't remember the tools back then we used, but the people involved in that element were really, really good at identifying risk in the beginning of the project and managing that risk throughout the monitoring controlling phase itself. But it's our ability as project managers to understand people. If we've done our analysis in terms of stakeholders, and we're able to manage the change that we're trying to instigate with our projects, then being able to work with people who have different self-interests in a large organization with a very exposed project, that is the complexity. I think the tools look after themselves. The technology, again, looks after itself. But people are unpredictable. And in that monitoring controlling phase, we have to keep many balls in the air as project managers and manage the expectations, the politics surrounding the project and the organization. That is critical, really.
Yeah, I kind of take a leak out of that page as well. And I really focus in on a key concept, especially here in state government management, is that we shouldn't be scared of political change. As a project, we need to identify when the elections are, some of them potential changes that would come from a change in government. And is that a risk to your project being changed or stopped or accelerated? So those are the things that you can't just put your head in the sand and say, if the politicians want to change things, they're going to change it. No, it's part of our job. It's to actually look ahead and go, well, there's an election coming. There's going to be some promises made. And we need to be ready to either deliver, change, pivot. And like you said, risk management, monitoring, controlling, that comes into it. So I do appreciate that, and do take a leap out of that page.
Yes.
I do see a bit of lacking in WA when we go looking at politicians and how they change. I actually think that they're probably dreaded, probably a bit too much. Should be engaged and probably a bit more embraced within the project, because they're the ones that are going to be in front of the cameras explaining what went wrong, not necessarily us as project managers.
Yes, but I think that change is an important aspect of what we do.
Yeah.
When you've got long lead time projects of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, the requirements defined at the very beginning are probably meaningless. And if you delivered those, you wouldn't deliver the benefits of the project itself. So we have to manage change, manage the impact of that change, and then make sure that we've identified the right trade-offs, and then our politicians, our decision makers can decide what they want to do to still deliver the benefits for that particular project.
Absolutely.
It's complex.
It is. And being able to say that there's one right way and one wrong way is, I think, is no longer the approach to that complex environment. And, diving into a bit of the human factor here, how does, biases come into, monitoring and controlling from your perspective? So
I think that in my experience working with a lot of stakeholders in different organizations, different cultures, generally people are too optimistic about timescales, about budgets, about what they can do perhaps and how they can deliver. And I think as project managers, we have to really question timescales quite rigorously. Are you really sure? What assumptions have you made then to be able to deliver to this particular plan that we have defined here? People generally are far too perhaps optimistic on their ability to achieve certain timescales, and perhaps they haven't been through the mill of working with projects, what can go wrong, and maybe in a vacuum, perhaps they could adhere to timescales they're very optimistic about delivering, but things happen and you have to factor that in. And maybe some customers I've worked with, some stakeholders, they have looked at the glass too half full rather than perhaps looking at half empty. We've got to be skeptical, even cynical as project managers, to be able to ask the questions, are you sure? What about this? What about that? And that takes experience.
It does. And I use very similar words to what you were just using there. I try and keep it pretty simple. I think that's optimistic. I think that's practical. And I think you're being a bit skeptical. So just using those three words in communication of what I think that particular plan or scheduling has really helped me within the profession as well, because people understand my position on that schedule.
Yeah.
And when I say it's optimistic, or severely optimistic.
Yeah.
There's severities of each side of that as well. It clears the communication that I'm trying to say, well, we can put this on a piece of paper. There is lines that say that, we could finish by this date, but I think that's potentially optimistic, best case.
Yeah.
And we need to be considering that there's other things.
And of course, our stakeholders may not listen to us. We might say there's a problem here, and I think it's a risk for the project in terms of delivering to our scope. And it may be that, we can build in some contingency if we feel that is something we need to do. We have got the power to do that. But making sure the client perhaps is aware of your fears, your sort of guidance and advice, but up to them in the end, I suppose.
Absolutely. And being able to communicate is one of the key things about project management. We have had so many times, people have gone, I've put a schedule in front of you, interpret it. No, you put a schedule in front of people. You also need to communicate what that schedule means sometimes. You need to be out of there and give instruction or give confidence that what they're seeing is the right thing or how they should be feeling about that. Now, they can make their own mind up, but you can show, I think that this is a practical schedule and we should be using this with potentially a little bit of contingency.
Yeah.
If you get asked, be careful who's in the room, obviously, but when you're sharing, try and keep a form of what you think the technical element of that is. Don't give don't try and give false confidence, but give confidence that you know what you're talking about. And that's kind of worked really well in the space.
Yeah, agreed. I think part of it is one, telling a story that can be interpreted by our customers. The second thing is being able to give the right information at the right time. There's no point giving them complex, multi-layered Primavera, Gantt charts to our customer when it's just impossible to interpret. There's no point giving them sort of complex process analysis stuff. So understanding what the information is required to make decisions, what that looks like, and obviously knowing our clients, knowing our stakeholders, and the needs that they have in terms of having to communicate that information to get the right decisions at the right time that we need for the project.
Yeah. The so what question does come up to everyone, and you need to be ready to answer it. I'm actually a Toastmaster as well. I don't know if you've ever been engaged and done some Toastmastering.
Not formally.
No, not formally, but so I'm with the Steer Perth Dinners Club on every second Monday night. And that is an opportunity for me just to practice storytelling and getting up in front of people, that you don't know, but also being able to have that confidence that, hey, if I can talk about this, I can talk about projects.
Good. Yeah, I never tried it, but one of my colleagues does it too.
Yeah, and I enjoy it. Bit of fun, and it's a good way to get feedback and practice. You need safe settings to practice as you go through your career pathway. Toastmasters is one to potentially practice that safe presentation or just storytelling. How to go from nothing to getting up in front of people and actually having that conversation.
I used to do it in Freemasonry many years ago in the UK. And it's a similar thing where you have to stand up and talk in most of the ceremonies.
Yeah, fantastic. The question I would like to now kind of pivot into is a bit about Fiona Stanley. How do you use this project with teaching students?
It's a very good example of a complex project where things perhaps did not go to plan. And it has many aspects in terms of initiation, but also monitoring control that are very useful for our students. And I think it's almost a good example of a tale of two halves, really, where you've got the building itself, which has a story behind that, and then the fit out and the ability to perform functions within the hospital itself. So there's two aspects there. It's also a good example of a politically sensitive project where many different stakeholders have been involved in the project itself, and also the commitment in terms of dates, which had been defined way up front, and how that changed over the life cycle of the project. So there's many learning aspects to this particular project. And I think in terms of just one project that has those different elements to inform our students is a very good case study example.
Yeah. It is one that I have dived in. I actually was part of my master's course in 2016 as well, and kind of gave me the idea of, you can you can learn a lot from books. You can learn more from case study, and I've dived into case study ever since. And I've gone through lots of different projects whenever it's available. And I've learned a heap even from doing awards, like marking awards for the Australian Institute of Project Management, PMI, IPMA. All those things are opportunities just to learn a bit more about case study that you'll never actually potentially see outside of an academic or online potential trolling, going through the information.
In the classroom, we use case studies an awful lot, depending upon what unit you're teaching. But in the project management program, case studies are vital. And student feedback supports that in terms of what they learn. So what we try and do is do the basic theoretical aspects, methodological aspects as well. Mm-hmm. And then we try and apply that with case studies. And that does reinforce the learning very well.
Yeah. So we covered Fiona Stanley in episode 1, and that was purely to focus on how it was initiated. It was a long journey from initiation to on-site, and then it was even a longer journey once they got on-site. We're here to talk about the monitoring, controlling, and some of the things that changed. It was considered, it was reviewed by the Auditor General up to 2010, again in 2012, not to the same extent, and then again in the IT space when they started implementing that. What is your take on, there's 3 different parts there that the project operated on. Can you give us a bit of an insight on what you think the monitoring controlling was in the first part, second part, and the third part?
It's interesting looking at the story of the project, this particular case study, because from the initial estimate of budgets, which the health department does push back on in the audit report, that it wasn't really a proper detailed budget. It was just sort of indicative figures, really, but it was taken as such, and that was the unfortunate thing. And then the replanning, of course, the project itself was more or less rescoped. It ended up being 783 beds, I think. So the scope increased massively. Mm-hmm. And I think that the way that they managed that could have been done a little better. So whether the risk and the trade-offs was articulated properly is a different matter. I think that the monitoring controlling aspect differed really, and I think it's a governance problem between the building construction itself. So it's a 2-phase element: initial design, and then it wasn't a fixed price; it was an agreed high-level price for the building construction afterwards with multiplex. But the main problems in monitoring control came with the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure for the building itself, and that was where there was an awful lot of monitoring and controlling problems. So just one very brief example, the IoT project, the Access project, that particular one didn't have an agreed business case. It wasn't signed off. And if you don't have that agreed business case, and that is carried through the project, and you're breaching one of the key 2 principles by not having that agreed, and also that business justification isn't there, then monitoring and controlling is extremely complex. What's your baseline?
Correct.
And I think that there was a lack of oversight on that aspect of the project, but I think it also stems back from poor governance, which we'll go on to in a bit more detail.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how you said there was always a pre-element. Now, the initial element created the expectations. And, if you're saying health had the belief that there was an indicative pricing with the initial things, that's where was the baseline? How was that done?
Sure.
What that was, while they may have had something called a business case, did it go to the expected length and detail that was required to go into that business case? That's left open to interpretation.
Yeah.
again, in that second stage, it was they came up against those elements where they didn't have something strong to compare against until the team started to bring together, all right, what are we delivering? How are we delivering it? And Multiplex was providing that information at a higher detail level. And then that gave them the baseline. And once it hit that 1.7 billion mark, it didn't move much from there.
No.
So you could see that the detail needed to be confident in a baseline is very different than indicative pricing.
Yeah, and I do wonder, on that particular story, whether part of it is the experience and learning curve of the stakeholders themselves, the people from the health side, people from WA. This is a massive project, and they had not done anything at that scale before. So I think you're building in a learning curve here. So, for example, if you look at the consulting costs for this particular project, which were, greatly n times bigger than they estimated. I think that they perhaps were too optimistic on the ability to deliver based upon their own experience and expertise. And that took a while perhaps to be fully realized. And then during the monitoring controlling phase for the building, perhaps they got their act together more than having learned the pain in an early stage.
Yeah, and there's an interesting a people story in there as well, is that people trust the numbers that come through from the SMEs, and project managers take those numbers and don't challenge them. They don't put any reality check into the first numbers that come up. Oh, look, well, they said it's this. Who am I to disagree with that person? And I try and challenge that behavior whenever I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
So there's that sometimes you're not allowed to challenge that behavior. So as a project professional, be wary of when you can challenge behaviors like that. But if you can, put some agency into your numbers that you are going to, instead of copy paste and send them up the report food chain, put some agency into them and say, are those numbers right? Would you, with your knowledge, agree with those numbers?
But it's hard, Reece, isn't it?
It is.
Because although you might have the experience in the project management space by working for different clients, customers in your region or further afield. Now, you may say to your stakeholders, have you thought about this? What about that? And they will come back to you and say, yes, we know the business, you don't. And we are confident we've looked at this. What should happen then is almost sort of your first stage audit by, in this case, the Auditor General or someone like that, and in the Fiona case, to have that independent oversight of that initial budget. They did not do that. But if they'd have done that, then I'm sure then perhaps they'd have identified more things in terms of risk or potential scope or assumptions made that underpinned that particular initial budget. That wasn't done. And I think as we look at the life cycle of the project, I think that when we see the things that were found in the 2010 Auditor General report, I'm quite surprised that they didn't do more follow-on reports more regularly. So with the building, okay, fine, Multiplex did a very good job of delivering from that sort of second baseline phase, if you like. But then when it comes to the internal infrastructure, the fit out, etc., there are so many elements there that could have been picked up, I feel, with more rigorous oversight in that monitoring control phase, either by the Auditor General or other parties, to highlight those things much more quickly. That was not done.
Yeah, and it's also lessons learned.
Yeah.
Like you've just done a $1 billion project, and it didn't really kick off too well. We're still on that $1 billion project, delivering some $100 million activities within that project's life cycle of the larger one. Are we taking lessons and we're applying them?
Yeah.
And what you're saying in the IT world is that they had that implementation of the access software and system that they didn't have a baseline business case. They didn't have that information. They had potential insights and some estimates that were not challenged, that were, potentially a project manager was there that the SME said, this is, pushed back. So, I've been doing, this is our business. I know what I'm doing, But there was no agency within that project professional or that SME, responsibility as well.
Yeah.
One of the things I always have a look at is if the SME is saying that this is the number or schedule, are they at all required to stand up or put themselves in the firing line when this comes on? And if the answer is no, and the answer is you are as an individual, the responsibility and the risk sits with you to either accept or reject.
Yeah, quite. Yes. I think getting somebody to own that problem, have skin in the game, so to speak, is quite critical, really. Yeah. But back to your point about lessons learned.
Yes.
I think, standing back and looking at how this particular project evolved, was monitored, controlled and delivered, that's fine. But I think there were plenty of great examples, case studies of where things went wrong in the health space from the UK back in the 80s and the 90s, the National Health Project in the UK. Some great examples of typical things that went wrong. And they repeated the same things, going big bang and things like that, not looking at sort of more agile approaches when it comes to some of the decisions they made on approach and methodology. So many things that you think, I know benefit of hindsight, but why did you go down that particular route? What was the information you had at hand to make that decision at that particular point in time? So in the monitoring controlling sense, it's almost like I feel looking at the information that for the project manager, who I presume wasn't a decision maker on method and approach, etc., almost had one hand tied behind his or her back, really. So I think that in terms of lessons, there were plenty there beforehand. So I'm slightly confused why they took the routes they did. But, project management in the thick of it all, it's quite difficult. And maybe, they thought it was the best decision at that point in time.
Well, critical thing that I see is the disconnect between what project management gets split into. So I've seen project managers in the IT world talk principles that I can talk those principles, but then disregard my input because I'm an infrastructure.
Okay.
And then vice versa. So if you're saying, what happened there, like I've physically been a part of a conversation where I'm like, oh, it's the same principle. You've run out of resources. You've got this, the principle of trying to deliver elements within your project, the principles of them trying to deliver elements within a project, but the advice or the communication about how to approach that principle that they were just struggling with got completely disregarded. So maybe that's an insight there that they'd be like, that's infrastructure. They do things differently. We're IT.
Yes, it is different because, of course, infrastructure you can touch, feel and see. Yeah. It's tangible. Or if we're delivering some kind of software solution, there are many elements before you actually see something that actually you can touch and feel. So it's a different way of visualizing perhaps those end deliverables. But of course, if we work iteratively, we can get that minimal viable product very quickly, that proof of concept, to get our stakeholders, our clients, able to understand how we can deliver to our requirements.
Yeah. And I find one of the key differences, infrastructure is task orientated. So that has a very specific element and knowledge around it. IT is flipped on its head. It's really people orientated. So you need a person who knows exactly what they wanted to deliver within that scope. And if they don't have that competency and they don't have the available hours to include into that project, the project doesn't move.
Yes. Although I think that even for infrastructure type projects, you have to involve people at an early stage. And I think back to the secure site building we did in the UK, which was looking at how to perform simulated functions, perhaps, that would be used during nuclear explosions. And we, at an early stage, we got all the stakeholders together in a room with our architects. We designed the building from the inside out. Right? What do you need, stakeholder one? Okay, I understand that. What do you need, stakeholder two? And you always build up then this sort of picture, this shared vision, if you like, of how the building would look. And when you have that shared understanding, you might get people coming out and say, well, actually, I didn't know that happened there. That perhaps makes me think a bit differently about what I need. So that interface is also important, the handover, the process, how the building will flow, how it will work. So these things are not sort of exclusive for building type projects, infrastructure. If you think about, using IT infrastructure, that process is also important to be able to visualize. But I think it's perhaps a bit more difficult because it's less tangible. You have to be able to think of a way of trying to visualize it with that client. We can all think about buildings, how they will look. We can get a nice pretty picture. We can build up some great architectural designs, and we can visualize of how we'll navigate our business processes inside that building. But I think in terms of the IT infrastructure, it's a bit more hard to visualize. We've got to work a bit harder, I think, to make that tangible for our client to understand.
What, when you're looking at the case study and some of the things, if you want to expand outside the case study that we're looking at, what was something that turned the monitoring and controlling around in Fiona Stanley, from your view?
I think it was really understanding that the project needed to be re-baselined based upon that change vision of how the project needed to be delivered. It's interesting. Looking at the Director General report and also other information around, I didn't see much on benefits explicitly now. And I would have thought there'd be a lot more there, really. So when the budget changed, I think it ended up being fourfold change, perhaps, from those initial sort of specifications. And they wanted, a lot more beds, a lot more buildings and things like that. Obviously, that was a different project then than what was first envisaged. I think that having a good experience, prime contractor was pretty key, really. Multiplex has had a lot of experience in designing and building these things. And really defining a plan that could be delivered based upon that new baseline requirement, that 703 beds rather than that lot less before. So I think the big change, I think, was the more realistic aspect of how the project could be delivered. As I say, it'd be interesting to see how they reflected on the benefits delivery aspect from that first initial estimate to the second, on what they felt was perhaps that variance there. So what benefits they felt they required for the project to realize initially versus that second iteration on monitoring controlling thereafter.
Interesting. And when was the critical point that was implemented, do you believe? Like, was it in that second part or was it the last part?
Well, the second part, certainly for the building itself.
Yeah.
They obviously re-scoped the project, and the contract was given to Multiplex, and they delivered what was required. But I think if you look further out and think about the ability for the project to deliver the benefits to the people of WA, that was still lacking. I know you talked about the project turned around, but I think you're looking at the building only rather than thinking about the use of the building and offering services to patients. So it was a phased opening for political reasons, as we know. But I think that, yes, the project did turn around in terms of being able to deliver the building, but the building by itself didn't deliver any benefits. It can't. So it needs the content, the clinical aspects inside, the processes, the infrastructure, that came afterwards. So I think it come back to my point about a tale of two halves, really. So one aspect of the project seemed to go well during the monitoring controlling phase, but the other parts did not. And I think when we come back to thinking about monitoring controlling as an important phase within project management, it does make me think about how that can be constrained by the governance framework. And I think in this particular project, and we can go into a bit more detail either now or later, but I think that one of the main constraints and difficulties was looking at this as a project when it should have been managed as a program. So when I think about what I've worked on in the past, the programs we delivered, those delivered the benefits to the organization. The individual projects will deliver outcomes, but they did not, cannot deliver the benefits until all those projects are coming in. So if we look at this particular project, it had a number of different elements to it, connected sub-projects, if you like, but the interface between them, the integration, if you like, of those projects wasn't perhaps what it should have been. So if you think about the governance structure, the organizing structure, if it was managed as a program with a proper program structure, then the interfaces between those projects could have been managed a lot more formally than they were in the way they were managed in the Fiona Stanley project.
And you point that this was talked about in the Auditor General. We've got a org strut up of that particular situation. How do you feel that could have been improved?
Well, let me ask you a question of you then, Reece, on the spot. When you look at that, what do you think are the limitations at it?
It's very top heavy.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Who is responsible for delivering the project in that org chart?
It's the project team at the bottom.
Right. So if you think about the two main aspects of that particular org chart, you've got asset delivery, the building, and then you've got service delivery, the internal infrastructure, the processes, the clinical aspect, all these different things. Now, if you are reporting progress or escalating risks up your particular strand of the organization, either asset delivery or on the service delivery, then you are thinking about the scope of your aspect of the project. Okay? If I'm on the asset delivery side, do I care much about the IT infrastructure? That's not in my scope. And I'm representing my organization. Let's say, for example, I'm the multiplex project manager. I'm delivering my building because that's what is specified in my contract. And on the infrastructure side, Serco, the prime contractor on there, I'm delivering the internal fit out. I'm delivering all the systems, clinical stuff, the processes, and there's lots of mini projects in there. Now, if I'm on the steering committee and I want to make sure that I have the story from one person, the project manager or program manager, that will not give it to me.
Correct.
Because I've got competing interests. They're down in the hierarchy further below. It's wrong, in my view, in my experience. I would have had the program manager reporting to the steering committee at that high level because that person's accountable. They will then be getting the key information from the prime contractor Serco and also multiplex on those two strands. And the interfaces between those two elements could be more formalized. And that might be that if in program terms, we're developing in tranches. It might be that the building itself is tranche one, but then we might have certain aspects of the building that come on earlier than others. That could be another tranche. It could be a number of different tranches then that we are defining. In program management terms, we'd also then have the senior business user. We'd have the right sort of sponsorship. And it's all a lot more formalized, knowing that the benefits cannot be delivered by one of those projects alone. It has to be the whole program that delivers, the building and the fit out. Either one will not deliver benefits. Both together will. And that's what happened at the very end, of course, but they could have been delivering benefits earlier if they'd have thought about the governance of this particular project in a lot more detail, in my view.
And the other thing is, and you see this in large organizations still to this day, the silo nature of the two, where, service could be improved by a better asset.
Yeah.
And asset may not need to be as big because they didn't check with service.
Yeah.
So this structure also implemented a competitive silo environment, which then, if you give it 3 years of these teams forming, norming, and then, controlling on the back of that then creates an environment that is really hard and a culture that, is almost combative in a project, and these projects do extend over years.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this is what happened in that environment, but this is the culture that just a simple structure over a long time and lots of people can start to bring out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have, my approach to humanity is everyone's really good until proven otherwise. Well, and while we all try and do our best in a project environment, there's only so much single individuals can do before they just conform and make sure that they're part of their ticking the boxes done. And while people are always up for, let's make this better, what is better is always different to different people.
Yeah, quite. And I think as project managers, it is difficult because, yes, we can hold a hand up and, fly a red flag in certain aspects of the project. But in the end, somebody somewhere, it could be, the senior stakeholders or the project sponsor. Okay, Reece, this is your job. Get back in your box. Project manage what you've been asked to deliver. Let me worry about that. I hear you. I understand what you're saying, that, back in your box, that's what I'd like you to do. And fine, that's okay, as long as we're able to sort of raise these as risks and there is, an escalation path, and that's fine. But in the end, people always blame the project manager, unfortunately, for the failings. And that's what we do.
Yeah. We were there to implement change.
Yeah, true.
And, because you're there to implement change, you are the target if the change doesn't go well. That is whether it's a good thing. And sometimes, if you don't always get the praise either. So you just got to remember it's that profession that we all know and love it gives you lots of opportunity to learn. It gives you lots of opportunity to change and do different things all the time. But there are some, not so nice things about it every now and again, and that's one of them.
And I don't know about you, but I think that when I think back to the projects I've worked on, we often have to be not quite Machiavellian, but it's almost like sort of chameleon-esque, really, when we think about how we have to adapt our style and our approach to a particular client, our organization, the culture, whether it's, thinking about sort of government type projects or defense type projects I've worked on. I have to change the way I work every single time. And I think that is an important aspect of what we do. We have to tailor not just our methods to our organization, but the way that we approach our projects specific to how our stakeholders are and how we perceive what they want and how they want us to work with them, really. That's a skill.
It is. And it's part of being a project manager.
Sure.
You got to not just be a chameleon, but you've also got to sometimes change shape, not just your colors. Not that as a tall person, I get to change shape and fit into any places. But
I don't benefit from your height, but I know you mean.
So, we've had a really good chat around, the project, some monitoring, controlling elements. We've got this sense that, people are needed. And tools are changing. What are some of the key tools, that you see coming in or are good at the moment or need to kind of be highlighted that, people should try to learn and get a hold of?
Yeah, I'm very much still on basics, really. I think that the information that I, as a project manager, need to convey or use to convey information hasn't really changed. I like dashboards. I've always been keen on dashboards. And if I think about sort of my business analytics side of things I do as well, I very much like, Power BI and things to look at the data I've got and then to bring some information that can be used for decision makers that's easily translatable. There are so many tools we can use as project managers. And of course, thinking about how AI can help us is quite critical for us all to look at. But I think project management, in my view, doesn't change very much over the years. I've been out of action for about 3 or 4 years. I have come out of academia and managed projects and gone back in. Yes, I've managed projects within the academic space itself, but it perhaps is a bit different to industry, which is my previous experience. But I think the basic tools that I need to produce project plans. And I would still use MS Project or Primavera. I need a risk management tool. I need to model scenarios. I think the modeling thing gives a bit more scope now with modern tools and AI to be able to look at scenarios. I think that's quite critical. The Monte Carlo stuff, that's always been there. But I think it's thinking about how we can use AI effectively and still have control over that data, what it means, be able to interpret and identify when it's not giving us the right information. That's a kind of a challenge for us, I think, in the near future.
Yes.
I don't think that many organizations yet are doing a great deal with AI in the project management space. I could be wrong, but in my conversation, they're still looking at, early stage, really, on a maturity level of 1 to 5, many sort of 1 and 2, really, looking at feasibility projects, over and above sort of, being able to do minutes of meetings and things. So I think exploring that is where we are right now. In terms of delivering benefits of this technology, I think it's, perhaps going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make. I call it competency, being able to interpret, is this data coming out the right one? Knowledge is good, but the ability to competently apply that knowledge, and being able to look at data and understand what it actually means, regardless of what the AI is giving you and trying to present to you, is going to be a key skill of the future. Like you're going to be given data that says one thing and going, like, it's almost like an SME. Are you going to trust the SME? Like, are we turning that to the AI? And do you what things are you going to put in place to make sure you can develop that trust?
Yeah, and that is a key challenge when we think about the future of project management, because when we think about the graduates that we are churning out in ECU and other universities in WA, they'll be more sort of AI aware, obviously, because we want to encourage them to use the tools available. But if you think about organizations, we want people to question the data, to question the outputs of AI. We don't trust AI's ability to be able to give us accurate information all the time. But how can we, in terms of churning out project managers potentially for Australia, how can we instill that level of rigor and questioning critical analysis from them, which will give them the understanding, knowledge, and skill to be able to know what AI is recommending versus perhaps what should be recommended. So if you've got somebody in an organization who's very experienced in this space, they'll know that an output from ChatGPT is absolute rubbish, forget that. But if you've got somebody who's not had all that sort of groundwork and war stories and been experiencing perhaps some of the highs and lows of project management, they've not got that background to be able to interpret, to critically analyze the outputs of AI. And I worry about that because people like myself and others and yourself, we'll be around obviously for a little bit longer. But when you've got people who've not been through that mill, perhaps because they've used tools more effectively, well, I'm not going to bother doing that because I can just get AI to do it. Now, there's no point doing it. I can do it much faster doing this way. Okay, that's fine. But can you really question the outputs in the same way? How can you really critique the output of the tools you're using in a really confident way? And I think we almost need to think about risk in a different way because of these tools. And I think it's a debate within project management to explore a bit more, really. Great, we've got these seasoned people who are around, and that's great. But what are the modern project managers who are going to be emerging the next few years? They're going to have a different outlook. And I think it's understanding what that means for projects and the profession, really.
Yeah. And, when I say the way I promote risk needs to change, we need to make it useful. Right now, it's seen as a register that you do quarterly.
Yes.
We need to make it useful. Monte Carlos is a way, but it takes a lot of effort. But there's also the approach of, hey, what does the outcome of this data mean? If you take the first estimate, which was $40 million, where does that sit on the risk profile of you not having enough funding to deliver your approved scope? So we're not pointing fingers here, just deliberately, you've gone in, you've secured your funding based on the SME. They first said was 40, the next time it was 60. But if you use the actual full process, maybe it comes out a higher number. And which one do you use? Like low risk is the higher number, high risk is the lower number, that you will eventually run out of money in your project.
Yeah.
So, and that's like when you take the people out of that and you put AI in there instead, the trust issue still remains and the risk is still there. You may run out of money, regardless if it's a human or an AI. Being able to challenge it and have a very useful risk is one of those key things that I think a lot of people are going to struggle with.
Yeah, I agree.
Joe.
I think it's interesting in the Fiona Stanley case, but if you think about that initial risk analysis exercise with that first estimate, I don't know how they did it. I don't know if they had key stakeholders who were and people from WA government who were involved in that process. Did they cost the risk? Did it really go through a rigorous process that was sort of audited separately? I don't know, but I perhaps would question perhaps how that was done, but I've not got any knowledge of that.
The Auditor General, and we went through this table in episode 1, the Auditor General could not find evidence of it until it was done within the 2007, or contingency was included in 2007. So classic example.
Yeah.
But
No, that's
it's very, very different. There's new tools available. You've got at-risk primaverias doing all these different things. And it's like you're now in a situation where you've got capability to do those risk assessments. Not doing them, what does that mean?
Yeah. But also I think other sort of key elements of that risk analysis exercise, I think again, let's separate the building and the fit out separately, or the infrastructure internal of the building. The methods they used, it was all waterfall life cycle type stuff. I didn't see the word agile anywhere really, but there were many areas of uncertainty. That ability to phase aspects of the project, proof of concept would have been fantastic to be able to do that for one element of the services of the hospital to deliver some kind of benefits, whether it's outpatient focused or certain sort of operations, to prove how the system would work, and then iterate through that with those key stakeholders. Many of the clinicians were not really involved in the way they should have been. They weren't empowered in the project on the system side that perhaps would have made decision makers a lot more informed about how things would work, rather than understanding down the line at operationalization when it's too late. And of course, then you've got delays and things like that, and things just don't work. So thinking about the risk approach and perhaps different decisions that could have been made, and making it a lot easier during the monitoring controlling phase, were quite critical, really. And we talked about lessons learned. I'm still confused why they felt going that sort of big bang waterfall route was the best. And maybe if you think back to the Auditor General report and some of the oversight during the monitoring controlling phase of the project, I'm surprised they didn't do more audits, even if they were smaller scale rather. If it was me decision making, and I was part of the steering group, I'd have got them in every 6 months, max 3 months, well, minimum, but maybe every 3 months. More informed thing, just to sort of see on the internal side of the hospital, to make sure things were on track. They didn't do that, of course, and relied upon the decision makers when the health department to sort of produce the reports, etc. But there's so many fundamental problems there. I'm surprised that they didn't develop more oversight of that particular phase of the project to make sure they were delivering effectively or able to deliver on.
Yeah. I'm happy to report from personal experience that there is a lot more risk approach within Department of Health. So I have worked recently with Department of Health in that space, and their risk approach to decision making has now not just pre-business case, but during business case and all of those things. And you can even see that in the business cases that got submitted to government in support of the most recent hospitals as well.
Oh, good. Okay.
So there are, there are ways to see case study in real life, and now you have to go trolling through government documentation, but you can actually start to see that these things are being applied, which is great for the. We've got 3-4 hospitals on the go now, not just the one. So we've gone from one Fiona Stanley to 4 hospitals on the go. You've got the Mums and Bubs and the 3 others that just got announced 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
So
similar scale to this one?
The Mums and Bubs is next to Fiona Stanley. And then there's a few others around with a bit of a renovation of Perth as well.
Oh, wow.
So there's a significant effort by the government at the moment. And, part of, one of the things that I want to do in the future as part of my newsletter is actually track and follow these major projects that are in actual unfolding at the moment. So look out for my newsletter when it comes, and that day information will be in there.
It'd be good for my students, so I'll look at that.
So, and like we've talked about lessons learned and those elements of, how does monitoring, controlling change projects? And we've proven that it can bring about not just change, but the ability to complete the project. So sometimes projects don't get there. So changing, monitoring, controlling can facilitate the actual end of a project in a good way.
Yeah.
What, when you're looking at entry level to project management level. So you've got probably people with 0 experience through to 7 years experience plus. What would be the key thing that you say that they need to get right in that stage of their career in the monitoring controlling space?
Well, I think for certainly thinking about my graduates, because of course they will undertake the project management program we have at DCU. And unfortunately, what happens there is they feel they can then just go out and manage projects on the back of that. So what I recommend to them, and not just monitoring and controlling, it's initiation, the whole life cycle, is to try and get a job in the project management office of an organization. And whether they call it something different in some organizations, it may be within a large organization, that might be a formal structure with lots of different people involved in that. Small organizations, it might be more sort of lip service. But understand the way that the office operates, work with the project management team to understand how projects can be managed, learn from the people who have been doing it for quite some time. Don't expect to go in there and start managing these multi-million pound projects, because that isn't the reality. I came from a sort of software background, I suppose, writing programs and then going into team leading and project management. I sort of learned that way. And then when I became a project manager, I then took on sort of more infrastructure as well as the system side as well. So I learned my craft. I made my mistakes along the way, but that came from hands-on doing it in the coalface in the rock and roll of projects. And some things went well, some things didn't. I learned an awful lot from the things that didn't go well. So I think that they've almost got to be able to understand and accept they will make mistakes within their project management experience in life, but that is part of the skills learning, really. And in the monitoring controlling space, it's really critical for them to understand how to use the tools to be able to report the key information, keep the project on track for the particular project. So yes, in the university, we can teach them some of the prime concepts and give them some great idea with case studies, but you've got to apply that and be on the coal face properly, really, to make that make sense, really, because the way that some organizations manage their projects will be very different, perhaps, on how we've taught it. Yes, we can go over, PMI type principles, methods and things like that, but people have different spins on that. They've got to adapt their style, their approach, thinking about some of the skills that we've given them within university and apply that for the project themselves. So I sort of feel that nothing beats experience working within the organization on the projects that they've got, really.
Yeah. And, what I hear with what you said was learn what to do in monitoring and controlling.
Yeah.
If you've got a bit of a concept of why in the bigger picture, but the what is very different wherever you land.
Yeah.
And learning what to do is critical, not only just to say that you have got that experience of doing it, but understanding that when you've walked into that institution, that there are other methods. You walk into another institution, don't become institutionalized based on this is the best way to do it.
Agreed.
There are other ways to do it. But we're coming to the end of the podcast, and we've talked about the key thing that they need to get involved do is the what. It's 2026. How does people get into achieving the what? From your view, what's happening out there at the moment, and how can people start to get that experience in that space?
It is difficult for graduates in this day and age. Yes, there are lots of opportunities out there, but really it's trying to elevate yourself above the crowd, really. And what does that look like, especially if you've got no experience? And I think that what we try and do, certainly in ECU, is try and get some internship going within the programs that we teach at ECU to at least experience something within the project space. So when I think about my experience in industry, if I had some CVs coming through for graduates, those that have a placement element there, I feel, rose above the opportunity and potential for a graduate rather than somebody who's not spent some time on that. I think that have an awareness of the tools out there, perhaps that project managers need to use, and perhaps look beyond the basics on perhaps how technology may change the way that we work, to have an appreciation perhaps of how the profession may change. We talked earlier on, it does change slowly, but change nonetheless. And I think that's an important thing that they can demonstrate to employers,
Yeah. Another way I've kind of been promoting as well is to get involved with your professional bodies that are around you. We have very active professional bodies in Australia. You have PMI, the Australian Institute of Project Management, and one that I've been working with, which is the International Project Managers Association, Australia. And each one has connections to different parts of the industry. There is a lot of weight behind the saying that's out there. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
Perth is a small city, very far away from other cities. So the very nature of project management in Perth is there is a very small network, and being able to engage with that network and have some relationships within that network is critical. And people that are in the network look to say, oh, who are you connected with? Who do you know that I can call up and say, hey, I trust your advice. Have you had this person in your environment? I was like, yeah, they helped in that PMI event, but did they provide any other help in that space?
Yeah.
Or did they extend themselves to try and go on above and beyond? And were they good at and into relationships?
Totally agree. And I think that with our students, I think we give them student PR membership or something. But I think that when you do go to these events, and it might be interesting talk, it might not be, who knows what the subject is and whatever else, but meeting people, getting yourself out there, talking to complete strangers who are, as you say, networked in our small city of Perth is really key. And I think that the more you can engage then, put yourself out there, that helps your opportunities as a potential graduate project manager. Totally agree.
Well, Laurie, we've gone through a really good conversation today. So thank you for everything that you've brought to the table today. I've really enjoyed listening to your perspective on how things come about, especially in the monitoring and controlling space. One of the key things, this episode's coming out in February. What will you be doing in February?
Well, as we've talked about, it's the new building for us in ECU, and trying to see how we change what we do within the confines of that different way of working. I'm also on this sort of research side. AI, you can't escape from it, but I'll be looking at more on how the profession is adapting to the technology. And I think what we don't do enough really is really analyze the performance or potential performance difference on using this technology effectively. That's not measured at all, really. It's all very well picking up information on, our news feeds and things like that every other person out there is using AI effectively. The truth is somewhat different, I think. And I think that the more research we can do on the true value of these tools and how that changes the way we do is quite critical. So I'll be looking at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, awesome. I will be still working with clients, and Monday to Friday, be doing a bit of client work. But in addition to that, I will be at the PMI monthly event. I'm also running my monthly social for project managers, and it's called the Scope Creep Social. So there's no actual theme to it. We have a guest, and we highlight that it's free to come along, put on a drink or two, and some food, and it's just an hour and a half to 2 hours, an opportunity to meet and greet.
Good.
And that's through CycleWise. I'll put the banner up. You'll see a nice tall guy standing at marking grounds on the third Wednesday of the month. And I hope to keep that going throughout 2026. It's an opportunity for students to come down and say hi. It's an opportunity for other people within my network to come down and just have a drink and catch up, and it is open to people beyond my network. So if you're watching this and you don't know me, you're welcome to come along.
Good.
Just introduce yourself, come and say hi, and that's kind of that's the approach to that kind of social creep.
Lovely. I let my students know. Excellent. Good.
So we've come to the end. I can't thank you enough. You've come along at your own time, and how we had this great discussion. Thank you for all that you've done, and I really appreciate what you're doing for students and the project profession at large.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So that comes to the end of the episode. If you've liked what we've done, please like, share, and tell a friend. That does give us the opportunity to demonstrate that this is being not only engaged with, but is actually worth sharing with other people. We need to try and expand our viewership and engagement to bring in the guests and take our cameras from my home office out to the world of the project professionals. I have got that planned in the next season, so you'll start to see me take my cameras out to the and meet people in their project environment themselves. So please like, share, and recommend. You do have a wonderful effect in being able to bring more people into that space. So this is me signing off, and thank you for watching Projects in Focus. Have a good day.